The Week 8 edition of the Fantasy Football Stock Report continues right here, fantasy owners. This is the 5 to avoid video, where we talk about guys that really kind of let us down this last week or might have tough matchups this week that you guys maybe want to stray away from, maybe bench in your fantasy lineups or just completely leave on waivers and ignore for this week, or guys that you might want to worry about going forward. So let's just jump right in. Quarterbacks this week. I hate to bring this name up because I had such high expectations for this guy going into this season, and he had been performing really well in the early going, but something clearly is wrong with Christian Ponder of Minnesota. I don't know what it is. I can't pinpoint it. The running game's doing great in Minnesota, but for the most part, Ponder's just having these times where he's just not putting up great fantasy stats. He only had 4 fantasy points last week. 4, and granted, Minnesota did play a real tough defense in Arizona, so maybe you weren't expecting a whole lot out of them, but you might have expected a little bit better than this. Peterson completely carved up the Cardinals on the ground for 21 fantasy points, but clearly through the air it was, and maybe they just abandoned the passing game altogether, but that doesn't satisfy you if you're a Ponder owner. Do you expect more? Hopefully you didn't start him against Arizona, because if you did, you were expecting a lot more than what you got out of him. And really, I don't really like his matchup either this week. I mean, he's got to recover from this real quick to go to Thursday night against Tampa Bay, a really hot team right now that has a very productive offense with guys like Freeman and Martin and V-Jack and Mike Williams. All these guys, you know, is Minnesota going to be able to shut these guys down on such a short week? And is Ponder going to be able to find his weapons? That's really the big question right now. So if you have better options at quarterback this week, I would try to avoid Ponder altogether. I don't see Ponder as anything more as a desperate, excuse me, number 2, number 3 this week. I wouldn't even bother starting him. I think there's way better options out there. I wouldn't even chance it this week. Unless you don't have better options, then obviously if you've got a buy or whatever, if you have Ponder, or if there's a better option on the waiver wire, like if there's Josh Freeman out there on the waiver wire, by all means get Josh Freeman over Christian Ponder if he's out there. He was available in my league, so by all means, if someone's better on the waiver and you have a buy guy like Flacco or Schaub and you had Christian Ponder, by all means get someone better than Ponder, because I think it's just going to get tougher from here on out. And I think they're going to use Peterson more on the ground than anything. Other guys this week I don't like. The Tennessee quarterback situation is a mess. There are reports that Jake Locker could be back this week. So, you know, I don't know if you can really trust Matt Hasselbeck this week. Obviously, the matchup's juicy against the Colts. But are they going to use the run more because of the fact that they can't stop the run? I think that's what's going to happen. So either way, I don't like either Tennessee quarterback. I look at either of them as nothing more than, again, a number 2, number 3, same boat as Ponder. John Skelton, obviously going up against, I don't like either quarterback for the San Francisco-Arizona matchup, either Skelton or Alex Smith. It's a defensive battle. There's not going to be much scoring. There's not, I don't think there's going to be that much in terms of doing much of anything against these two teams. It's just a matter of which defense is going to be able to stop the other the best. So I don't like either quarterback for that matchup. And again, and obviously you're sitting Joe Flacco this week because of the bye, but he had a disappointing week last week against the Texans. But I guess that was kind of expected because the Texans defense is still very, very strong. By the way, the Texans destroying the Ravens. It's clear also at this point, if you're a Ravens D owner, you want to cut them loose immediately. I already did, because it's clear those injuries have decimated that defense. All right, running backs. This name is probably going to surprise a lot of people that he's on the avoid list, considering he did so well last week. But again, it's the matchup. You are not starting LaRod Stephens-Howling against San Francisco. Please do not do it. I understand that he came, you know, William Powell fumbled on the first play, was quickly in the Cardinals' doghouse, and then LSH came in and did really, really well. Yay, good for him. He's going to be the starter now in Arizona. But you cannot tell me, you know, have the 49ers, I can't even recall if they've given up a 100-yard rusher all year. Maybe once. I think it was Peterson. But they just don't do it very often. This is going to be a defensive war. It's going to be a low-scoring game. Heck, it could end up being 3-2 like the Penn State-Iowa game from a couple years ago. I mean, it could be that bad. So, I mean, he's probably going to have better matchups going forward where he can plug him in as a number 2 guy, maybe even number 1 with the right matchup. But for this week, you can't chance it. If you have no other options and you have to start him, don't expect him to hit double digits. Just don't. I don't think it's going to happen. I think it's going to be a battle royale. I just can't see him going off against this 49ers defense. So really temper your expectation with him this week. I can't see him as any more than a number 2, number 3 play. But if it were me, if I had better options on my team than him, I would definitely start him over LSH with better matchups. If I have Chris Johnson, I'm starting Chris Johnson over LaRod Stephens-Howling. If I have Rashad Jennings, yeah, I'm starting him over LSH. These guys that have better, juicier matchups, you want to start them over these guys that don't. So please, don't make that mistake. If you have better options, please sit LSH this week. Other guys that I don't like, Daryl Richardson of the Rams going up against New England. I mean, yeah, it's a timeshare, but it's looking more and more. Every time it looks like Steven Jackson's going to outscore the guy. So for now, I wouldn't worry about Richardson. He's nothing more than a desperate number 3 play at this point. Felix Jones really let his owners down last week, who were looking for a big week from him, filling in for DeMarco Murray, the injured DeMarco Murray, I should say. The Giants D, really tough. I don't think Felix is going to get a lot of ground there this week either. And I have to mention my Lion, Mikael LaShore. The matchups are just tough for the Lions right now. And obviously, we're not starting him. I said on here, you do not start him against Chicago. He only had 6 fantasy points. Hopefully, you didn't make that mistake of starting him unless you didn't have better options. But this was expected, so props to me for that one because I called that. I wouldn't know when getting a touchdown. It was not going to be productive. You don't want to start him this week, though, against Seattle either, because Seattle's D is just as strong as Chicago's, and I don't think the room's going to be there. Wild card this week for you guys, and this, again, I know is going to be a shocker, but Stevan Ridley of New England. He only had 6 fantasy points last week, and now this week the Patriots have to go up against the Rams. Granted, the Rams this season have been better against the pass. They made Brian Hartline disappear one week. But I don't know. I really can't see how the Patriots use all these running backs. Is it Ridley? Is it Woodhead? Bolden, of course, has the knee injury right now. But, how are they going to utilize all these guys? So I would really kind of temper expectations for Ridley. Obviously, there might not be better options out there to start than Ridley. So maybe he's more of a number 2 play for you, but I don't see him as an elite starting option for you guys this week. Wide receivers. Sorry, Panther Nation, but there's going to be a lot of Carolina players on this list, and for understandable reasons. The Panthers stink right now. I mean, I don't think we can say that in any other layman's terms besides that. The Panthers stink. Cam Newton's attitude sucks. He's not a leader by any means. This is just not a good week to be a Carolina Panthers fan or a Carolina Panther fantasy owner, because you cannot rely on any of these guys this week going up against the Bears. I mean, you saw what happened with the Lions players last week. They even took Calvin Johnson out of the game. They shut down Megatron, for gosh sake. You are not starting a Carolina Panther this week against Chicago, period. Do you hear me? Period. You are not starting a Carolina Panther this week. Do not start Cam Newton. Do not start Jonathan Stewart or D'Angelo Williams. And do not start Steve Smith or Brandon LaFell. You can't do it. In this case, I don't care if you have better options or not. Get somebody on waivers for a 1-week replacement. These guys cannot be trusted this week. I don't buy into LaFell yet. He's an extreme hair puller. I ditched him early in the season when he wasn't catching balls anyway. Yeah, so ignore his 11 points last week. You're not starting him against the Bears. You're not starting Steve Smith against the Bears because he only had 8 fantasy points. Newton's going to continue to struggle. It's just an awful worst of the worst matchups. You can't trust him. You cannot trust any Carolina Panthers at this point. Don't even get started on Greg Olsen. You can't trust him either. Don't start Greg Olsen either. Don't make the Panther mistake, folks. Just don't do it. So you're not starting these guys against Chicago. Period. All right, off soapbox. Other guys I'm worried about this week. Darius Hayward-Bay, I mentioned earlier in the year in my season preview that Denarius Moore is the rated receiver to own. He's clearly outperformed DHB this year. Granted, DHB had the concussion injury at this point this year, but going up against Kansas City, yeah, that's a weak defense, but I still think Moore is going to be the one that's going to be going off. Maybe I definitely see Moore as a startable number 2 guy. Maybe Hayward-Bay at number 3. He might get you a touchdown, but other than that, I don't see him having a really strong week this week. Torrey Smith has been a big letdown lately ever since that big week where he played after the death of his brother. Only had 4 points last week. Obviously, you're sitting him this week because of Baltimore's bye, but definitely monitor him going forward. Baltimore plays Cleveland in Week 9. That could be a better matchup where he tends to break out. So, but obviously sit Torrey Smith this week. And Mike Wallace, boy, I think the holdout has just affected him this season. Antonio Brown has clearly outperformed 60 minutes this season. So only had 5 fantasy points last week. Granted, the matchup is great this week against Washington's weaker defense. But I like Brown as a better option here. I think Wallace might struggle again. Maybe he'll get you double digits this week, but I don't know. I think it'll be really, really close. I really like Antonio Brown though this week though, but Wallace, temper expectations on him. Finally, real quickly, tight ends to talk about here. The one that I would really worry about this week is Martellus Bennett of the Giants. I thought he'd have a breakout year instead, though he's really been inconsistent. Of course, the knee injury hasn't helped matters. Only had 7 points last week. The question is, can you really trust him going forward? And I don't know. I wouldn't this week going up against Dallas. I wouldn't even trust Jason Witten. Witten has also been really inconsistent this year. Granted, you might not be able to afford to sit Jason Witten, but he only had 4 fantasy points last week. And now you're going up against the Giants with that tough pass rush and definitely a tough secondary. So, again, either guy, temper your expectations for them. I see either one of them as nothing more than number 2s this week if you have to start them. David Thomas of the Saints, he did have 8 points last week. The Saints played Denver this week, but there are reports that Jimmy Graham will likely come back this week after he was kind of a late-minute scratch because of that ankle injury last week. Hopefully you knew that he wasn't going to play and sat him. I had a feeling. Thankfully, I have Kyle Rudolph on my bench, so I quickly pulled him in, although granted, Rudolph also had a donut last week too, so really I had zeros on both my tight ends. But hopefully Graham comes back this week. So if he does, obviously you're not starting David Thomas. But if Graham misses again, maybe you look at Thomas as a number 2 guy for this Denver matchup. Denver secondary, not that great. So plug him in. Jared Cook of the Titans has really been a tough one to judge this year. Only had 3 points last week, but they also threw to too many targets. You got Washington and Britt and Kendall Wright and Cook. So there's just too many weapons there that they try to utilize. Granted, none of them really fantasy relevant, but I mean the matchup again with the Colts is juicy, but I think they're going to still utilize the run more, so I don't like them this week. And again, like I mentioned, Greg Olsen. 3 points last week. It says right here on my notes, I don't know if you can see that. See Newton, LaFell, and Smith right there. The same Carolina guys. So that's the status there. All right, guys. That's it. That's it for the week. Again, thank you guys so much for your patience, for me to get these up for you guys. I want to help you guys win just as much as I want to win every single week. So don't forget, again, if this is your first time checking out the 5 to Avoid, don't forget to check out the 5 to Ride video. I will post the same player information I just gave you on my Facebook page as well. And good luck in Week 8 this week. Hopefully you're going for a victory. If I get a victory this week, I'll be back at 500. That's a great place to be at this point in the season, at the midway point. 500 or above is always good prospectus for the playoffs, so hopefully you guys get there as well. Thank you guys so much, and good luck this week.